Are you addicted to plastic crack? Literally got a million GW paints and don't know what to do? Wish picking colours was much simpler? Hello and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. My name's Amy, aka Warp Fiend, and today we're going to be going into some of the things that Games Workshop doesn't want to teach you about using colour in your paintings. I'm going to be painting up this model, Lady Annika from the Soul Blight range, so stay tuned. Before we start the video though, I'd super appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and like this video, and if you have any feedback at all, please leave us a comment. We all know that Games Workshop wants you to buy their paints. They've created a system where every colour has its own equivalent highlight and shade, and you have to own them all really to paint according to their system. While I'm the last person who could criticise someone for owning too many paints, there are a lot of times when using a limited palette can be fun and really kind of expand your understanding of the painting process. To start, I'm going to prep a palette. If you're not already, you need to use a wet palette for this kind of painting technique. If you don't own one, that's fine, just find a flat plastic container like I have here and line it with some folded kitchen towel and baking paper. I picked out a small handful of colours that I want to incorporate into this piece, and together you can see they have no particular cohesion of the palette, and more instinct than thought went into picking them. I knew I wanted a vibrant green for the long flowing cloak, and that it would be an important colour for the overall piece, so I picked a desaturated green for the base and a highly saturated yellow green for the highlights. To contrast this, I chose a red, which is on the opposite end of the colour spectrum from green, and I wanted a more desaturated blue as a shadow colour, so I used some Caspian Blue by scale 75, along with two highlight colours, a cool one in Ice Yellow and a warmer one in Sunny Skin Tone. I'm going to use these to layer cool and warm highlights throughout the miniature. I also add a purple, and later on I'll be adding some black and white when I just want to push those shadows and highlights a little bit further. Other than that, that's all the colours I'm going to be using. These colours have a little bit of colour theory behind them, but it helps to think of theory as more like kind of general guidelines rather than hard and fast rules. Still, it's always useful to have some idea of things like complementary colours, contrast, saturation and warm-cool values. I used a zenithal base coat beforehand to get a good idea where the light and shadow would fall. I'm not going to focus on a section at a time or one colour at a time. This is the advantage of a wet palette over a regular one. You can keep all your colours to hand and dip into them whenever you need to touch up a section or add a bit of colour somewhere. So I'm just laying down base coats, not bothering about being particularly neat. These colour tones will get modified a lot as we go, but I'm just picking whatever feels right at the minute. Notice that I'm not worried about getting solid base coats. Don't be afraid of your model looking bad or messy in the early stages. Unlike GW tutorials where shades and edge highlights might be the majority of the light you have to think about to create the piece, this style requires a little bit more thought about light, so we're going to start out with a light sketch. While the paint is still wet, I start adding in some highlight tones where I can, jumping around to wherever I think they'll be light, not bothering to change colour between highlights, but just getting some basic lighting down. I'm now bringing in light and cool tones from all over the palette, but remember, there's no limitation on what colours you can use to highlight, so long as it's properly balanced with the others around it. The exact shade is less important than the saturation and light value. If you want to highlight a green with an orange, you can make that work. These techniques require certain skills like brush control, keeping your paint to the right consistency, and a developed eye that can understand the basics of light and shadow, but all of these are skills that you can easily develop by taking a little time out to practice. The next stage of painting is where I'm going to take that haphazard use of colour to the next level. I'm going to use a series of glazes and highlights to link colours together, jumping between them wherever I feel there's not enough balance. If one end of the piece is all purple and the other all green, the piece will end up unbalanced, but if you bring a little bit of that green into the purple, you create a harmony. Here's the fantastic part though. To a large degree, it doesn't matter what colours you bring into the mix, so long as you stay within your chosen palette and balance it correctly. This is a technique I refer to as a Habsburg palette, because like the real life Habsburg dynasty, it's basically all inbreeding. Acrylic paints are great for this because when mixed they often desaturate into greys due to the mixture of pigments that often go into a single acrylic paint. This is great because the greyed out, desaturated colours, that's the easiest way to transition between two other colours. There's a great video by digital artist Marco Bucci on the subject and I'm going to link in the description, so be sure to check that out. For now though, all you need to know is that layering together these desaturated colours is going to add so much life and depth to your piece. If it gets too desaturated, you can always just glaze back in those original bright colours. When doing desaturated pieces, it's important to always get your pop colour right. The pop colour is the most saturated, eye-catching colour on the piece, and for this I picked the robe. I had an idea of a rich green, kind of like velvet, but in terms of texture I wanted to keep it very smooth to contrast with the chaos of highlights going on with the rest of the piece. As the most vibrant colour, I wanted the tones from it reflected in the other colours, but not reflect any colours itself. Now my instinct might be slightly off on some of that, mainly that the jump between the two greens I picked was a little bit too much, and as a result it was difficult to get a smooth blend by brush working quickly, so I managed to finish this with some subtle airbrush blending. If you don't have an airbrush, you can always just make a series of intermediate blends to bridge the gap. It's only at this point, after I've started to get some real colour and texture into the piece, that I'm going to switch down to a fine detail brush and crack out my super attractive magnifying lenses. This model has some fiddly details and I want them a bit better defined. Some of the details, like the underside of the collar, I'm just going to give a rough highlight to suggest them. You don't need to perfectly define every detail unless you're doing a golden demon entry, particularly if they wouldn't be catching any light. More important to a style like this is just the general vibe of the mini, getting something that feels good to you. It's helpful to start working on your model at a zoomed out scale to get the big picture, then zoom in to work on the details. It's important to zoom out every now and then to remind yourself what the whole piece looks like. Sometimes you get so used to looking at a mini that you need to walk away for a bit to see what needs work still. In this case, I see that the green isn't balanced enough in the hair, so I glaze a little into a few places. It helps to balance out a bold colour on the model when you use other little subtle hints to anchor it around the model like this. With the green looking more harmoniously distributed, I also add a bit more light to the forehead to define it a little better. It feels like this area should be catching more light than it currently is. I spend a short amount of time fixing some final details like this before calling it done. And here's the finished piece. So a few days after painting, when I'm sitting down to record and looking at this, I'm still super happy with it. There's a few things I might have done differently. We can always be more critical of ourselves than others, and it's important to know just when to call a project finished. I really like the overall vibe of this piece. I'm super happy with how clean and crisp the green has come out, even if maybe it could have been a little bit more harmonious with the rest of the piece. The skin, I'm really happy with some of the blends I got, the sword, and the subtle colours in the hair I really like. So on the whole, this was great fun and I'm pretty pleased with it. So that's some of the ideas I've been throwing around when it comes to colour and how things have changed since GW colour charts were guiding my decisions. I'd love to see your attempts at using Habsburg palettes to create interesting results, so please share them with us on Bleeding Tree Gaming on social media. That's all from me, except for to say thank you for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe. Bleeding Tree Gaming is a Nottingham-based collaboration project exploring all aspects of the hobby. My co-hosts Autumn Witch and Wiki Pete have some fantastic content coming soon, so we look forward to seeing you then. Take care and see you soon!